Good evening. We begin tonight with a developing story from the conflict zone that is fundamentally changing how military analysts view modern warfare. Ukrainian forces have successfully deployed advanced drone technology to neutralize what Russia considered its most sophisticated armored assets, resulting in catastrophic losses estimated at nearly $2 billion. Tonight, we're examining a military engagement that demonstrates the dramatic shift occurring on today's battlefields. What we're witnessing is nothing short of a revolution in combat tactics. Traditional heavy armor, once considered the backbone of ground warfare, is now proving vulnerable to relatively inexpensive aerial systems operated with precision and coordination. The events that unfolded near the Donetsk region tell a remarkable story. Russian military planners had deployed their most advanced main battle tank, the T-90M Pro-Riv, believing it would provide a decisive advantage. This wasn't just any armored vehicle. We're talking about a machine valued at $4.5 million, equipped with cutting-edge digital fire control systems, enhanced protective plating, and a powerful 125mm cannon. Moscow's military leadership viewed this deployment as a potential game-changer. After sustaining heavy losses throughout the conflict, reportedly more than 11,200 tanks, the Kremlin needed something that could restore confidence in their armored capabilities. The T-90M was supposed to be that answer. Let me take you to the morning when everything changed. The location was the northern edge of Shakov. Picture this: a thick layer of fog rolling across the terrain, the kind of weather that military commanders have exploited for centuries to conceal troop movements. Visibility was limited, creating what appeared to be perfect conditions for an armored advance. As the fog began to lift, a formation of 36 Russian tanks moved toward Ukrainian defensive positions. Leading this assault were 6 of the newly deployed T-90M tanks, positioned at the spearhead of the formation. Ahead of these armored giants, approximately 40 motorcycle reconnaissance teams raced through the mist, their mission to identify weak points in the Ukrainian lines before the main assault began. From ground level, this appeared to be a well-coordinated offensive operation. Russian commanders likely believed they were exploiting favorable conditions to seize tactical momentum before Ukrainian artillery and air support could fully respond. But something was watching from above. High above the battlefield, beyond the reach of the morning fog, Ukrainian reconnaissance drones were already airborne and operational. 2 types of unmanned aerial vehicles were providing real-time intelligence. The Furia Mk2, a sophisticated reconnaissance platform valued at approximately $120,000, worked in conjunction with smaller Lee-type UAVs worth around $60,000 each. These weren't just cameras in the sky. What these systems were doing was far more sophisticated. They were feeding precise geographic coordinates of every single Russian tank and scout team directly into Ukrainian fire control networks. Every movement, every position was being tracked, recorded, and transmitted to Ukrainian artillery units in real time. The Russian advance, which looked coordinated from the ground, was actually moving directly into what military strategists call a prepared kill zone. Ukrainian forces knew exactly where every enemy unit was positioned. Approximately 9 kilometers from the advancing Russian formation, Ukrainian artillery crews were ready. The 2 S-3 Akatsiya, self-propelled howitzers, each valued at around $600,000, received targeting data and opened fire. The morning quiet was shattered. Artillery shells streaked through the air and impacted the front of the Russian column with devastating accuracy. The motorcycle reconnaissance teams, those fast-moving scouts who were supposed to identify weak points, were forced to swerve violently to avoid the incoming fire. The carefully planned tempo of the Russian advance was immediately disrupted. This artillery barrage had an additional effect beyond the immediate damage. It forced Russian units into predictable movement patterns that the overhead drones could track even more easily. What had been an offensive operation was rapidly becoming a defensive scramble. Then came the moment that changed everything for the Russian tank crews. One of the advanced T-90M tanks rolled over a concealed TM-62 anti-tank mine. The explosion was massive. The tank's turret was literally blown off the chassis, hurled nearly 20 meters into the air before crashing back to Earth. Think about what that moment meant for the crews of the other tanks. These soldiers had been told they were operating the most advanced, most protected armored vehicles in the Russian arsenal. They believed their armor would keep them safe. In an instant, that belief was shattered. They now understood they weren't just facing enemy guns. They were advancing through a layered defensive system. Mines below them, drones above them, and artillery adjusting to their every movement. As Russian motorcycle units broke into open farmland, Ukrainian reconnaissance teams initiated the next phase of the defensive operation. A Punisher loitering munition, worth approximately $50,000, locked onto the fast-moving scouts and began marking targets for follow-up strikes. Moments later, a HIMARS launcher valued at $5 million unleashed a devastating salvo. Rockets tore across the sky and impacted with precision, flipping motorcycles and creating shockwaves that rattled tank crews. The Russian column attempted to reform, but they were doing so in territory that Ukrainian drones had already thoroughly mapped for targeting purposes. What came next represents the future of anti-armor warfare. First-person view drones, each carrying approximately $3,000 worth of explosive charges, skimmed just above the grass at high speed. These small, agile systems weaved through smoke and used the heat from tank engines to guide themselves before diving onto tank roofs, the weakest point of armored vehicle protection. 3 T-90M tanks were hit in rapid succession. Each one erupted into thick plumes of smoke as ammunition cooked off inside. Crews abandoned their vehicles, now fully aware they were being hunted from angles their armor simply could not defend against. The 3 remaining T-90M tanks pulled back. Their crews, trained on the most sophisticated systems Russia could provide, were retreating because they understood the fundamental reality. Their armor was no longer adequate protection. From concealed positions in tree lines, Ukrainian artillery continued to apply pressure. A Dana M2 howitzer, worth about $2 million, worked in coordination with a French-supplied Caesar system valued near $4.8 million. These systems weren't firing blind. They were receiving continuous updates from overhead drones, transforming every piece of reconnaissance information into precise firing data. The objective wasn't just to destroy tanks. Ukrainian forces were blocking Russian reinforcement routes and hammering the rear of the armored formation, preventing any organized recovery or counterattack. As darkness fell over Kharkov, the fighting did not end. At exactly 10 o'clock in the evening, Ukrainian forces launched their night operations. UJ-22 reconnaissance drones, valued at approximately $80,000 each, lifted off and climbed to an altitude of about 600 feet. They were accompanied by squadrons of Ram-2 loitering munitions, priced near $70,000 per unit. These systems banked east toward battlefield sectors where the 3 surviving T-90M tanks had retreated to regroup near ammunition supply trucks. The infrared sensors on the UJ-22 drones illuminated operator screens with glowing heat signatures. The remaining T-90M tanks, parked silently in an attempt to avoid detection, stood out clearly against the cooler surrounding terrain. A single encrypted order was transmitted: execute. One by one, Ram-2 drones descended from altitude, locking onto the structural weak points of each tank. The first explosion triggered an ammunition cook-off inside the tank. The second and third impacts followed in rapid succession, igniting nearby ammunition trucks and completing the destruction of Russian assets in the sector. In less than 10 minutes of night operations, all 6 of the advanced T-90M tanks that Russia had deployed with such confidence had been eliminated. Not disabled, not damaged, completely destroyed. When dawn returned to the battlefield, Ukrainian forces were ready to exploit their success. At the front of their advance rolled two Tamys robotic demining vehicles, each valued at approximately $1 million. These sophisticated systems used sensors to detect buried mines and trigger them safely ahead of advancing infantry troops. Behind these robotic systems, Ukrainian infantry teams moved forward in disciplined bounds, advancing 100 meters at a time. MG3 machine guns, belt-fed weapon systems worth about $10,000 each, provided supporting fire from mounted positions. Overhead, MiG-29 Mu-2 fighter jets, valued at approximately $25 million, swept through the morning mist. They released S-13 rockets, priced at $15,000 each, into tree lines and fortified positions where Russian forces had established defensive bunkers. The explosions shattered these defensive positions and ignited fuel storage areas. By 7:30 in the morning, organized Russian resistance in the sector had collapsed. Approximately 20 Russian vehicles were destroyed, including tanks and armored personnel carriers with a collective value approaching $200 million. This was just one sector of a broader pattern of losses that analysts now estimate at $2 billion across multiple fronts. Russian forces attempted to launch a second counteroffensive to stabilize the situation. However, this effort was detected early by Ukrainian thermal imaging drones. M777 howitzers, valued at $3 million each, pivoted to engage the new threat from a distance of 12 miles. Their first rounds struck fuel transport trucks with precision. A Javelin missile system, costing $200,000, destroyed another T-90DM tank by punching through its turret roof, exploiting the same weakness that FPV drones had targeted earlier. By dusk, the Shakov battlefield had become what one observer described as a graveyard of blackened steel. But the story doesn't end at Shakov. Beyond that battlefield, Russian forces moved to defend a strategic location, the Narrow Faminsk missile and ammunition depot. This facility was critical to Russian long-range strike capabilities. At 8:42 in the morning, Russian BM-21 Grad multiple rocket launchers opened fire from concealed tree-lined positions, while T-90 and T-80 BVM tanks surged forward. Kaliber cruise missiles streaked overhead toward the depot's outer perimeter. This represented a major Russian effort to stabilize their logistical and strike capabilities. Ukraine's response was immediate and multi-layered. Su-27 fighter aircraft and Su-24 bombers swept low across the battlefield, dropping precision-guided munitions that destroyed Grad launcher batteries before they could reload their rocket tubes. Combat robots advanced alongside infantry units, streaming real-time video back to Ukrainian command centers. NATO standard 81mm and 120mm mortar systems bracketed Russian troop positions, forcing soldiers from shallow defensive bunkers. Russia countered with electronic warfare systems. Jamming vehicles disrupted the signal links to incoming FPV drone swarms, causing many of these aerial systems to lose control and spiral to the ground. Russian T-90 tanks pushed forward aggressively, firing 125mm shells at advancing Ukrainian elements. Mine-resistant ambush protected vehicles absorbed initial impacts, buying time for Ukrainian anti-armor teams to maneuver into flanking positions using 30-pound shoulder-launched rocket systems. One T-90 was destroyed at close range, forcing remaining Russian tanks into narrow urban corridors above the depot complex. At high altitude, Su-27 fighters engaged Russian interceptor aircraft while Su-24 bombers adapted anti-ship missiles for strikes against hardened command bunkers. From the tree line, Ka-52 attack helicopters slashed in low, firing 30mm cannon bursts across Ukrainian positions until drone swarms rose to meet them. Some of these drones carried explosive payloads, while others simply dove into rotor systems, creating catastrophic mechanical failures. Several Russian gunships either retreated or crashed, unable to operate effectively in the dense aerial clutter created by Ukrainian drone operations. With aerial threats reduced, Ukrainian engineering robots carved lanes through minefields and wire obstacles. T-72 tanks surged into the depot complex under cover of a rolling artillery barrage that shifted forward in 200-meter increments. Drone spotters marked concentrations of Russian armored vehicles for immediate artillery strikes. Rocket-propelled grenade teams engaged isolated vehicles from alleyways, while fuel storage dumps and ammunition sheds erupted in secondary explosions. In a desperate attempt to save the depot, Russian forces fired additional caliber cruise missiles at the facility. However, Ukrainian air defense systems positioned less than 5 miles behind the front line intercepted most of these missiles in mid-flight. A handful struck the compound, adding to the destruction but failing to reverse the tactical momentum. Inside burning corridors, small, unmanned ground robots provided suppressive fire, while both Ukrainian and Russian combat medics briefly negotiated micro-ceasefires to evacuate wounded soldiers. Minutes later, the fighting resumed. When the final explosion faded and smoke began to clear, the Narrow Faminsk depot lay crippled. Its ammunition storage facilities were shattered, and its logistics network was severely disrupted. Military analysts have estimated that Russia lost up to $1.8 billion in missiles, helicopters, and depot assets at this single location alone. Far from the front lines, Ukrainian officers continued coordinating operations from a command shelter in Shahuiv. They utilized older radio systems with specialized encryption codes to maintain communication security. Russian Orlan-10 reconnaissance drones attempted to locate their position through signal triangulation, but electronic warfare trucks blocked these efforts with targeted interference. Outside the command facility, logistics crews worked urgently to salvage fuel supplies and spare parts from damaged storage hangars. These materials were loaded onto trucks destined for the Kharkiv Air Command to sustain ongoing operations. Then, intercepted communications revealed a new threat developing. Russian forces were planning an assault on Molodany Lia with the objective of encircling Kharkiv. The next phase of this conflict was already beginning to take shape. What we've witnessed from the minefields of Shakov to the bunkers of Narrow Faminsk represents a fundamental demonstration of military capability. Ukrainian forces have shown that relatively inexpensive drone technology can systematically dismantle Russia's most costly and sophisticated weapon systems. Russian tanks, which for decades represented the dominant force on ground battlefields, are now reduced to burning wreckage scattered across contested terrain. The financial impact is staggering, with losses approaching $2 billion in this series of engagements alone. This shift in tactical reality proves that heavy armor is no longer the deciding factor in ground combat. We are witnessing the evolution into a battle dominated by technology, specifically unmanned systems that can coordinate across multiple domains simultaneously. The question that now faces military planners around the world is profound. If the most advanced tanks can be systematically destroyed by drone systems costing a fraction of their value, what does this mean for the future of armored warfare? Whether Russian forces can adapt to this drone-dominated battlefield environment remains uncertain. Traditional military doctrine emphasized the importance of armored breakthrough operations. That doctrine is being fundamentally challenged by what we're seeing in this conflict. The implications extend far beyond this particular conflict. Military forces worldwide are watching these developments and reassessing their own equipment priorities and tactical doctrines. The age of armored dominance may be giving way to an era defined by networked sensors, autonomous systems, and precision strike capabilities. Tonight's report has shown us a glimpse of warfare's future, where technology and coordination trump traditional measures of military strength. The revolution in military affairs that strategists have discussed for decades is no longer theoretical. It's happening in real time on battlefields where the outcome is measured not just in territory gained or lost, but in the fundamental transformation of how wars are fought. That's our report for this evening. We'll continue to monitor these developing situations and bring you updates as more information becomes available. Thank you for watching.